For joining us. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Compassion Fatigue. Can we care too much? One important thing I want to point out before we officially get started, we have enabled language interpretation services for this event. So the first thing that you'll need to do is you'll need to find the language interpretation icon and select your preferred language, whether it's English or Spanish. And the interpretation icon looks like a little globe. And so everybody has to do this. So that's one of the first things that you want to do. Just find the interpretation icon and select the language that you want to listen, whether it's English or Spanish. Okay, and with that, I will go ahead and hand this off to our presenters.
Thank you, Violetta. Welcome, everybody. We're really glad to have you here this afternoon. And before we really dive in and get started, we're just curious who's with us today. So we have a poll that will be brought up here in a second. And we would just like to know what your role is. So if we could have poll number 1 brought up about their role. So we have several options here. Just pick the one that most seems to fit your role and what you do in your work. And we'll see who we have here today. So we have community member, we have direct child serving practitioner, family member, state government professional, state level professional, training and technical assistance professional, and then other. And in our polls, we're unable to do type in your role or type in the polls. So if you have other, you can enter into the chat what your role is if it doesn't match on here. So we'll give another maybe 30 seconds to let people answer, and people are still coming into the room and getting settled in. So people are still rolling in. I'm glad that you guys are here with us this afternoon to talk about compassion fatigue. All right, do you think we're ready to close the poll, or do we still have people coming in?
We still have a few people coming in, April.
Okay. Thank you all for answering this poll. I see in the chat, we have outreach, we have early Head Start Childcare Partnership folks, we have Head Start Intervention, directors. We have a wide range in the chat box that I can see here. Mental health clinicians, family development specialists, lots of coordinators with Head Start. We have a teacher assistant I see in the chat box, family advocate. Lots and lots of participants from Head Start and case managers and mental health and wellness supports. So I see coaches, I see lots of different participants that'll make this a really rich webinar. What's beautiful about this webinar is that it's for anybody and everybody. So we're glad that all of you are here. All right, are we ready to close the poll now, do you think, Violetta?
I believe so.
Okay.
The answers have evened out, yes.
Okay. All right. So it looks like most of you that are here with us today are direct child serving practitioners, which is wonderful to see all of you here that are working with children and that you've been able to join us and maybe get away from your classroom or your environment with kiddos just for a little while to be with this webinar with us. So thank you all for being here. We have somebody from everywhere. So thanks for joining us. All right. So as I mentioned, you are here to participate in our Compassion Fatigue, Can We Care Too Much webinar with the Infant Toddler Specialist Network. And I'm April Westerman. I'm an infant toddler specialist with the State Capacity Building Center, which is a service of the Office of Child Care, and I am based in Spokane, Washington. And I'm going to pass this on to my peer to introduce herself. Nancy?
Hi, thank you, April. I'm Nancy Darlington. I'm also an infant toddler specialist with the State Capacity Building Center, and I have background in both Head Start and child care. So I think we'll have something for everyone today. We're really excited that so many of you are interested in this topic. It's timely and important.
Yes, and this is the first step for you all to recognize that there may be some compassion fatigue or trauma or burnout. And so we are really, really proud to have you guys here with us and recognize how incredibly hard the last 2 years have been, and even before the pandemic has happened. Your roles are very important and you give so much of yourselves. And this time is for you to help heal yourself and find strategies and understand what compassion fatigue is. So we want to commend you for taking the time out of your day to do something for yourself. Violetta?
Thank you so much, April. And once again, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Before we officially dive into the content, I want to cover a few reminders, housekeepings. All the lines are muted. This call is being recorded, and for this event, we have enabled closed captions. They should show up at the bottom of your screen, but if you don't see them, you can just locate the live transcription icon and click on the up caret and click on show subtitles. That's going to turn them on. Similar, if they are distracting and you want to turn those settings off, again, you can locate the live transcription icon and click on the little up caret and select hide subtitles. If you happen to be watching this webinar on your phone, please keep in mind that some of the Zoom subtitle features may not be available. Again, for this webinar, we have enabled language interpretation services. So if you haven't done so, I strongly encourage you to locate the language interpretation icon. It looks like a globe, and select your preferred language, whether it's English or Spanish. And we encourage everyone to do this. So again, just locate the language interpretation icon and select your preferred language. If you only want to listen to the interpreted language, if you only want to listen to Spanish, you can mute the original audio by selecting mute original audio. And again, just one final thing, please enter any questions, comments in the chat. If you don't get around to sending a comment or a question in the chat, you can always send an email. And again, one final reminder, if you are watching this event on your phone, some of the Zoom webinar features just may not be available. And with that, April, I believe that covers all the housekeeping. So I will send it back to you.
Thank you so much, Violetta. And I also wanted to address a couple more things. I know there's a question about if this PowerPoint or recording will be available, and the answer to that is yes. You, as participants, will receive a follow-up email with the recording and the PowerPoint. So that will come to you post-webinar. And then if you are having technical difficulties or you need support in any way during this webinar, just type into the chat box, because we have our IT folks kind of monitoring. So don't hesitate to reach out if you need support. All right, so let's go through our outcomes today so we're clear about what this webinar, what you can expect from our time together today. So the first one is really to deepen your knowledge about and understanding of the symptoms and causes of compassion fatigue. We're going to examine the compassion fatigue process. And then we're going to identify strategies and resources for reducing stress, increasing mindfulness, and using healthy interventions. And I just want to point out that the first half of this webinar really is going to be a lot of sharing information about what compassion fatigue is. And there will be some polls throughout and a little bit of engagement. And then the second half of this webinar is going to be strategies to think about and plan for yourselves or your staff or your organization or your community or the children and families that you work with. So just as a note for how this webinar will be engaged in. So next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so we have our very first food for thought here. And we have a quote that says, exhaustion is not a status symbol. So I want you to think about your workplace, the TV shows that you watch, maybe what you see on social media, maybe some billboards that you drive by or that you see every day. And I want you to think about what are some of the expectations and messages that fuel you throughout the day. So what do you get your gumption from? What do you get your excitement from? Or maybe it's the opposite. What kind of messages are you getting about exhaustion or how you're engaging in your day? And so one of the experiences that Brene Brown writes in her book is about the burden of getting enough done. And so she goes on to say that I think it's a combination of technology and the economic realities where so many people are doing more than one job. It's the whole adage of doing more with less. To be really honest with you, I don't think it's doable. The expectations of what we can get done and how we will do it are beyond human scale. She goes on to say, and because there's always this readily available technology, and you can get your emails and notifications at any time during the day, all night long, there's no stopping and celebrating or acknowledging the accomplishment of anything. Instead of feeling pride or recognition, what everyone is made to feel is, thank God I can get this off my to-do list. One thing I really think that makes a difference is to simply stop, recognize, and offer feedback. Feedback is a foundation of respect. And so thinking about if you're in a leadership position, someone in a leadership position who holds him or herself accountable for finding potential in people and processes. And so I think that, to me, that really resonates with all of, your work is so intense with children and families and staff in general. And then to add the pandemic on top of that, I feel like this quote that she brings to us about always going on and doing things beyond human scale. I think that that's our field in general. And the pandemic just makes it so that we have to go that extra, not the extra mile, but the extra several miles to make sure that we are taking care of other people and that we're missing out on taking care of ourselves. And some of the messages about exhaustion, I hear people saying, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. I did this, and this, and this, and this, and all of those things they list are not for themselves. It's for other people. And so, I think that the messages about exhaustion can be, we try to make them positive, but really if we look behind the message of exhaustion, it really does come down to what are we not doing for ourselves? What are we not thinking about? So just something to put out there as we begin our conversation about compassion fatigue. And before I move on, I want to bring up another poll about maybe your familiarity with compassion fatigue. So if we could bring up another poll here in a second, we're going to have you answer what your familiarity is with this topic. So if you could just decide for yourselves, would your familiarity of compassion fatigue fit on a sticky note, a letter, or in a notebook? I know when I started this work, I don't even think my knowledge could have fit on a sticky note. Maybe one of those little sticky notes that are like this big, but not on a regular sticky note. But now I feel like for me, I could fill a letter, maybe not a notebook, because I still have a lot to learn about compassion fatigue and the things that we're going to talk about today. So maybe a letter. Nancy, what about you? Where do you fall on this poll?
I think I would be in about the same place you are, April, starting off with, I could tell you the title, compassion fatigue, and maybe make up a definition. But I think now I could probably write a letter about it. But as you said, there's so much more to learn. It's a fascinating topic.
Yeah. Thanks, Nancy. Nancy and I have been virtually traveling around with this webinar for states, and so we learn something new every time we do this from our participants. Nancy, would you say that that's the case too for this?
I would say learning about the topic, but also learning about where people are and what they're experiencing and why it's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. We've heard a lot of anecdotal stories about people's compassion fatigue. And so it's really, we feel honored to be able to be in your presence and that you feel comfortable sharing with us where you're at in this world of compassion fatigue. All right, Violetta, I think we're good to close the poll. Let's see where we all fall here. Okay, so it seems to be pretty evenly split, maybe, but leaning towards the sticky note. Definitely where we started. About a third of you can fill a letter, and then about 15% of you could fill a notebook. So we're glad to have all these levels of experience. And please use the chat box to share your experiences, ask questions, have dialogue. So thank you so much for answering that poll. All right, so let's talk about what is compassion fatigue. So I'm going to read two different definitions here for you, and they're on the screen for you to follow along. So first, the first definition states that compassion fatigue is a state experienced by those helping people or animals in distress. It is an extreme state of tension and a preoccupation with the suffering of those being helped to the degree it can create a secondary traumatic stress for the helper. And that definition is offered by Charles Bigley, and he is very well noted in the topic of compassion fatigue. So if you want more information, I encourage you to look up Charles Bigley because he's done a ton of work. I think he even has a classes or a university or something dedicated to compassion fatigue. So he's a good resource. The second definition that we have here is that compassion fatigue is a broadly defined concept that can include emotional, physical, and spiritual distress in those providing care to another. It is associated with caregiving where people or animals are experiencing significant emotional or physical pain and suffering. And that comes to us from the Compassion Fatigue Awareness Project, which is another really great resource if you want to know more and get lots of great resources on this topic. And something I found interesting in doing this research is that compassion fatigue was originally kind of noticed and talked about in the veterinary world because veterinarians were having to put suffering animals down, and they were suffering themselves with all of this caring for the animal and for their families. And so they noticed, that there was people were reacting similar ways in veterinary offices. And so they coined the term compassion fatigue. And then it was picked up and realized for the human population that we also experience great loads of compassion fatigue. So just a little bit of background about where this came from and just an interesting fact. So, all right, so this next slide, these next couple of slides may be a little bit hard to read. However, you'll be able to get the PowerPoint sent to you and you can see them when you receive the PowerPoint. So So this model is the compassion satisfaction and the compassion fatigue model. This actually comes from the professional quality of life. So we have, in general, we have a professional quality of life, and it can go two ways. Our professional quality of life, we can go one way to compassion satisfaction, and then we can swing another way to compassion fatigue. So the professional quality of life is the quality that one feels in relation to their work as a helper. Both the positive and negative aspects of doing your work influence your professional quality of life. So people who are helping others, like all of you out there, may respond to individual, community, national, and even international crises. You may be in the mental health field, you may be a direct child serving practitioner, all those roles that we noticed in the poll earlier in this presentation. So understanding the positive and negative aspects of helping others really can improve your ability to help you work with those you are helping. And that ultimately helps you keep your own balance. So when we go into the professional quality of life, as I mentioned, there's two ways you can go. So they encompass the positive, which is the satisfaction, and the negative, which is fatigue. So those are two different parts of helping others who have experienced suffering. We'll talk about that compassion satisfaction is actually the opposite of compassion fatigue. So compassion satisfaction happens when people feel excited and pleased by their work and what they're doing and helping others. People who experience compassion satisfaction find meaning in their work, and they can see the value that they bring to the world and feel joy about their role. We're going to dive into compassion fatigue in just a minute, but I just really want to hit home that there are these two different levels of compassion fatigue and satisfaction that can happen. And I really want to ensure that we have a definition and we have knowledge about these two so that we can identify what we're feeling in the moment and what we're feeling within our work. Just to continue about compassion satisfaction, that really you can lean on the compassion satisfaction as a source of hope and strength and hopefully some resiliency ultimately. And the satisfaction that you have with your work and your job really does allow you to face another day. It helps you face another disaster or another tragedy. It's like a quiet knowledge that helps you know that you can make a difference and that you process the same strengths you see in the support in the survivors that you work with. So, and just something too that I want to point out on this slide is that there is actually a professional quality of life quiz that you can take, and the website's on this page here, and we can put it into the chat box. But you can actually go on to this website and take a professional quality of life quiz to see where you're at in this process, whether you lean towards compassion and satisfaction or whether you lean towards compassion fatigue. So if you really want to know how you're doing, this quiz may be able to help you. And this website, the professional quality of life, is part of the compassion fatigue resources that we have for you. So we will definitely make sure that link gets in the chat box, and of course you'll have it when the slides come out. So the next slide, this one is the one that's kind of hard to read, but it's really important. And so we wanted to make sure we included it in here because it is the whole process of compassion fatigue and how this manifests within ourselves. And so when I talk about how it manifests in ourselves, I'm talking about exposure to suffering. So when we're exposed to so much suffering and we just are just out of sorts and just are feeling kind of off maybe, or just mentally just having some just feeling kind of cloudy and down and things like that. This process may be the process that you're feeling and didn't recognize it. And I can say for myself that when I started doing this research, I had a lot of ahas for myself, a lot of ahas. And so I hope that you find some ahas in here as well. So typically what happens, this graph starts in the top left corner with exposure to suffering. So if you're working with a family and they're just experiencing some pain and suffering, or just going through divorce, their kids are sick or whatever it might be, that is the that could be an initial exposure to suffering. And so anybody seeking reassurance that it will be okay from you, that's kind of the exposure that starts this process. So then we go into empathetic response and concern. And just thinking about that you all enter this field because you love and care for families, you care for children, you care about the community, we care about education, we care about the equity, the diversity, the multiculturalism of all children and families that we work with. And you want to support their health and wellness. So when we're working with a family that's experiencing stress or trauma, it can be really hard for our profession to have the tools to support this. And it impacts our field even more than doctors and nurses, I would say. A lot of this research has been done on doctors and nurses because of their profession. And again, as I go through this material, it just screams early learning, early childhood, working with children and families. And so when we initially start working with these families that are suffering, we respond with empathy. And we show the natural well-being of the family or the child, or maybe it's a staff member that's experiencing this. And when all goes well, you may feel that you truly made a difference in someone's life and were able to help them live a healthier existence. However, if this pattern continues, then there's a long-term exposure to suffering. And they may, families and children and staff may make great strides under your compassion, understanding, and just support with their stress and trauma. But not all families can be as resilient as some other families. So when we're working regularly with people who are in decline, it's easy to begin feeling like residual compassion stress, because we are feeling like, what are we not doing? How can we do more? How come they're not, getting better? How come they're still, under stress? I've done everything I can, but it's not us, and that's part of the compassion fatigue process. And so when left unattended, these feelings can easily manifest as traumatic memories and actually begin affecting the physical, emotional, cognitive, and behavioral health of early learning peers and staff, or anybody working with people that are experiencing this suffering. And then we go into, after long-term exposure to suffering, then detachment starts to happen. And so when we are under so much stress and fatigue that people experiencing detachment may be unable to use their empathetic abilities when caring for others. You may feel like a walking zombie, incapable of feeling emotions. And at this point, compassion fatigue has fully taken hold. So the next slide, please. Thank you. So to think about this, we have some warning signs of compassion fatigue. And so I just, there's a lot on this list to think about. And you may think to yourself like, oh, I felt this before, or this looks familiar. It may, you may be thinking it was just stress, or that you are just tired or whatever. But This list really does outline some of the warning signs that you could be experiencing compassion fatigue. So I will just let you guys look at this for a minute. I'm not going to read the list off for you, but Nancy, is there anything in the chat box or anything you want to add while folks are looking at this warning sign, at the warning signs?
Well, excuse me. It's really interesting watching the chat go through. People are sharing some of their responses and experiences to this topic. There was one positive suggestion made of someone who says she writes down a daily positive affirmation and then shares that out with colleagues. So that's a really nice opportunity to think about how do you not only take care of yourself, but take care of the people around you to maintain a positive attitude.
Absolutely.
There was another question, which we don't have to really answer now, but there was a question about extroverts versus introverts and who might experience more either compassion satisfaction or compassion fatigue. And I thought that was interesting. Yeah. And I'm seeing some people are having a little problem with the link to the professional quality of life survey. And I wouldn't worry about that right now. It is on the slides when you get them. And I think you can also Google and find it, but you can try that later.
Okay. Thank you for that, Nancy. And that is interesting. I haven't had the introvert versus extrovert be brought up on this before. So that's definitely something to take note of, Nancy, I think, as we continue this work in the future.
Curious.
So thank you all. Yeah, thank you all for your feedback. And I see the chat is just rolling. So thank you guys for participating in the chat box. You know, when you said that about introvert and extrovert, it made me also think about people's love language. And, you know, this might be down in the resources or strategies section, but I just think about, you know, how people like to receive help and support and how people like to give support and help to others. And so our love languages definitely come into play here as well. All right. Next slide, please. So the second element we're going to discuss is secondary traumatic stress. And we bring this into the conversation because compassion fatigue really does mimic secondary traumatic stress and burnout. And so we're going to talk about burnout after this as well. And so we really wanted to give some definitions and signs and symptoms of different, these three different areas so that you for yourself could really identify if it is compassion fatigue or if it's secondary traumatic stress or if it's burnout. So that's why we bring these into the conversation. So secondary traumatic stress. In order to remain emotionally healthy ourselves, it's critically important that we understand how the elements of trauma can be absorbed. So that's all of you doing the compassion fatigue or compassion satisfaction work. Individuals affected by secondary stress, you may find yourselves re-experiencing personal trauma or notice an increase in arousal and avoidance reactions related to the indirect traumatic experiences. You may also experience changes in memory and perception, alterations in sense of beliefs in your capabilities to achieve a goal or an outcome, a depletion of personal resources, and disruption of your perception of safety, trust, and independence. So all professionals working with those who are experiencing trauma can learn approaches and strategies to protect yourselves from being emotionally overwhelmed by this work. So then I just want to also add that vicarious trauma shares similar symptoms with compassion fatigue. Vicarious trauma often mimics PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder with staff or people experiencing trauma within their inner selves as a result to exposure to trauma. And so this is very similar to compassion fatigue, but vicarious trauma differs in the fact that it singularly refers to inner turmoil, and compassion fatigue can manifest in physical ways. So just to keep that in mind, that secondary traumatic stress is about our inner turmoil, and compassion fatigue comes out in physical ways, just as a reminder. Next slide, please. So on this slide, you can see that we have some signs and symptoms of secondary traumatic stress. And just kind of read through these and think about how they differ, or how are they similar to the slide we looked at with the compassion fatigue signs and symptoms. And we're going to compare these in a minute or two so you can really see the difference side by side. Next slide, please. All right, so the final notion that we're going to talk about here is burnout. And again, when I was doing this research and really thinking about how what we needed to include in compassion fatigue, burnout is kind of a new term for me, and I'll explain why in a minute. But to define burnout, it's not a medical diagnosis, which I was surprised to learn about. And some experts actually think that other conditions such as depression and trauma and those kinds of things are actually behind burnout. Some research actually suggests that many people who experience symptoms of job burnout don't believe their jobs are the main cause. So whatever the cause, job burnout can affect your physical and mental health. So consider how to know if you've got job burnout and what to do about it, or versus secondary traumatic stress versus compassion fatigue. And so I just find it very interesting that burnout is directly related to our jobs, and that it is not a medical diagnosis. Those were two things that I found really interesting when I was doing my research about burnout. So I didn't know if anybody else knew that about burnout. But some possible causes of job burnout, they can come from various factors, including a lack of control. So a lack of ability to influence our decisions around our job, like our schedule, assignments, or workload. Maybe there's a lack of resources to do your work. Another cause could be unclear job expectations, dysfunctional workplace dynamics, extremes of an activity. So if you're like working on a project and things may be chaotic, you're constantly spending your energy to remain focused, which can lead to fatigue and job burnout. A couple more points to make here is lack of social support. So if you feel isolated in your job or in your personal life, that can make you feel more stressed. And finally, a work-life imbalance. So if your work takes up so much of your time and effort that you don't have the energy to spend with your family and friends, you will probably burn out really quickly. And just as a note, that compassion fatigue is not burnout. And like I mentioned, burnout typically results from your job or work or colleagues, where compassion fatigue results from physical and mental exhaustion. And if you're experiencing burnout, you may feel frustrated, angry, cynical. And if you're feeling or experiencing compassion fatigue, you will feel numb or sad, or, both. So next slide, please. So here are some more signs of job burnout. And I've read some of these already. So, just these types of feelings. I'm going to have us go to the next slide because I really want to show the comparison of the three side by side. And again, I know this is really hard to read, but we just felt like it was important to put these side by side so we could really examine what the difference is. So, is anything on here surprising to people, Nancy, or anything that stands out to you, Nancy, with this comparison?
Well, there were a couple very interesting comments that came through in the chat. One relating to burnout, there were two comments. One talking about if it increased exposure to trauma or to hard things, you might start to feel that you're losing your compassion, that you just, almost becoming immune. And another one said, I've always tried to fake it till you make it, but then you can't fake it anymore, and burnout has taken root. So I think those are two really good observations to pay attention to yourself when you realize that those may be happening.
Right. And again, I see lots of great conversation happening in the chat box about, the differences between burnout, secondary traumatic stress, and compassion fatigue.
And
I just happened to see, where does COVID fit in this list?
yes.
I leave that to you. I mean, COVID has impacted us all so incredibly differently that, we could be experiencing, it could lead to burnout because of the work that you're doing has changed and become more chaotic. Like I shared about burnout, is just that your work-life balance is off. But Nancy, what do you think? What do you think? I mean, COVID could definitely fit in any of these buckets here.
Yes, and I think the perspective is, compassion fatigue when you're caring for others, but we're also in the situation where every one of us is experiencing maybe a higher level of stress and worry and concern, highly due to COVID, on top of everything that comes with the work that you do. So yeah, I think it plays a role in all of these.
Absolutely. All right.
I have a heaping combination of all three, someone said.
Yeah, we hear that a lot when we're doing this. I think the most I hear after I do this is like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know compassion fatigue was a thing, and that's what I have. And now I know what I can do, So, well, I empathize with all of you out there in Zoom and the work that you do with children and families. I can empathize. I guess I'll just stop there. I mean, it is impacting all of us. So I just appreciate you all being so open and honest and sharing these in the chat box with others who are feeling the same way. All right, next slide, please. All right, so we're going to do a poll about how much your understanding of compassion fatigue has improved. So if we could bring that poll up. We're going to have you we're just going to do a little check-in with everybody to see how you're feeling about your understanding. So there's 4 choices, and we just kind of want to know, in the last 40 minutes, how much has your understanding of the symptoms and causes of compassion fatigue improved? So not improved, a little improved, moderately improved, or significantly improved. So we'll just give a little bit of time for all of you to engage in our poll here. And I think I mentioned this at the beginning of the webinar, but my understanding improves so much every single time I do this. And I can't wait to go back and read the chat box to see what other nuggets we can pick up to think more about as we continue to develop this topic. All right, is the poll slowing down, Violetta?
Yes, I believe so. We can close it.
Okay, thank you. Let's see what we got here. So we have some moderately improved is mostly where we're falling here. And I know it's hard when we've only been here for 40 minutes and you haven't really had time to reflect or engage in the materials. So I hope as we go on that you'll pick up some strategies and have some more learning as we go along. So, all right, thank you so much for that poll, Violetta. And with that, I am going to pass the second part of this on to Nancy. So Nancy, take it away.
Thank you, April. And I have the honor of hosting a more positive approach to this topic, I think. We've learned about compassion fatigue, secondary trauma, burnout, and some of the causes and consequences of these things. So now we're going to talk about what you can do to build your own resilience and lessen the effects of these three things that we've talked about, and also reduce your overall stress. Some of which comes from these things or an effect of these, and some it's just part of life. So let's dive in so we can go to the next slide. And what I'd like you to do is just pause for a moment and think to yourself, if you could do anything for a week, what would you do? Don't think about obstacles. It's too expensive. It's not realistic. I don't know how. Just imagine if you could do anything, what would you do? And you can write it in chat if you'd like, or just keep it in your own mind. I'm seeing some go by. A lot of sleep and travel.
Yes, lots of travel, beach and beaches.
Learning to fly a plane, that's on my list.
Yeah.
Oh, these are awesome. Barbecue, more travel.
Lots of travel, Hawaii.
A lot of beaches.
Yes, the beach is a soul filler for sure. I can say that on our little infant toddler specialist team that all of us have the beach next to our heart. And we all say that we use the beach to fill our buckets and make us
That's right.
do a mental check-in. So
that's right. So let's move to the next slide. Keep that thought in your mind. And I want you to reflect on that dream that you just envisioned, your dream of doing whatever, if you could do anything. And when you think about the reality of actually doing it, how do you feel? You might feel excited. You might feel anticipation. But you might also feel frustration or sadness if your dream is something that you can't imagine ever actually happening. So if we look at this circle of control, it's really important to recognize that a circle of control exists in each of our lives. For example, on a typical day, some of the things that are in your control, I'm sure you could write the list yourselves. You might be able to control your reactions, to think before you speak, how you treat other people, listening, being in the moment, being kind, taking care of your responsibilities, things like that. But there's other things that are out of your control, such as, and again, I'm sure you could write the list. Can't control the weather. You can't control what other people like or dislike. Can't change the past. You can't control other people's actions or reactions, their thoughts, their emotions, or their words. So being mindful of your circle of control can really significantly reduce your stress. And the more you focus on the things that you can control, the less you will focus on the things that are out of your control. I'm still seeing beaches come by in the chat. I did see a few that said, I saw one that said sad because they couldn't imagine they would be able to do it. All right, let's go to the next slide. How full is your pitcher? This is a little bit different take on the concept of, is your glass half full or half empty? In the work that you do, why is it important to understand your level of stress? Who might be impacted by it? So here's one way to think about it. If you work with babies and toddlers, for example, for babies and toddlers to be resilient, they need resilient adults and caregivers. So it might be helpful to think of yourself as a pitcher, and every day you pour and pour into the cups for the children. And as the saying goes, you cannot give what you don't have. Now, your work may not be pouring directly into children. It may be staff, it may be others, but someone is the recipient of what you have to give. And it's very important to focus on your own resilience and social emotional health to keep your pitcher full. So let's go to the next one. So here we go. We've talked about compassion fatigue. But how can you avoid it? Some of it's avoidance and some of it is the lessening of the experience, but we're going to talk about avoiding compassion fatigue right now. It's important to know that putting yourself first is not selfish. And I think someone mentioned this in the chat, something along these lines, that it's easy to feel when you're seeing pain or suffering or stress of others that your needs and health should take a back seat because they don't seem as important. But remember the pitcher, you cannot pour from an empty container. If you neglect your needs and ignore your own internal cues, you're actually limiting your ability to adequately care for others. Creating emotional boundaries can often be difficult. Our natural instinct is to show empathy and to care when we're exposed to someone else's suffering. And while it may seem counterintuitive, being able to set and maintain boundaries actually allows you to care for individuals more fully because you're able to, really step back and take a more holistic view of their needs rather than being so close that you can't be objective. And that's sometimes when you get pulled in and then you're impacted and you start to experience that compassion fatigue or even the secondary trauma when you get too close and too involved. And finally, having a support network, whether it's work colleagues who really understand your daily challenges. It might be other people that you might have social support networks. All of these networks help us recharge. And it's really important to feel that others know you, understand you. It might be a book club, going out for coffee with someone, playing sports. All of these things are opportunities to replenish yourself, to fill your pitcher. The other important thing is that some of these friends or colleagues might be able to recognize signs of compassion fatigue that you didn't recognize in yourself. And it's important to think about your support network. Where do you go to find the most support? Is it family? Is it your work and your colleagues? Could it be something in your community? But pay attention to that and find and nurture those support networks. They're very important. So let's talk about burnout on the next slide. What about burnout? It's really important if you are feeling burnout or suspecting that you might be feeling burnout, that you try to take some action. So here's some ideas to get you started. Evaluate what your options are. You might discuss specific concerns with a supervisor. Together, you might be able to change your work expectation, reach compromises or find solutions, set goals for what must get done and what can wait, so that you're not feeling that you are responsible to do everything. Seek support. We've talked about the support networks already. Reach out to coworkers, friends, loved ones. That kind of support and collaboration can help you cope. And if you have access to an employee assistance network, assistance program, take advantage of the services. Someone said, yes, sometimes professional support is helpful. It's important. Try a relaxing activity. Take care of you. You might want to try yoga, meditation, Tai Chi. If people have things like that they do, feel free to put it into the chat. Exercise can really help to deal with stress and take your mind off work. Getting enough sleep. I see someone said journal, and journaling came up several times in the chat earlier. A gratitude journal, journaling just seems to really help. Someone also said earlier, a good cry helps. And someone else said, yes, tears release oxytocin and endorphins. So it's okay to cry, pray, and sleep, someone is saying. Also, mindfulness. Mindfulness is the act of focusing on your breath and being intensely aware of what you're sensing and feeling in every moment. And this is important, without interpretation or judgment. And that's even of yourself. In your work, this practice involves facing situations with openness and patience, and again, without judgment. So keep an open mind as you think about what your options might be, and really try not to let a demanding or even an unrewarding job undermine your health. Again, it's not selfish to take care of yourself first. So let's talk about mindfulness. On the next slide, what is mindfulness? Again, it's the ability to stay focused on one's present experience with non-judgmental awareness. And I'm going to give you some examples of how mindfulness can help create a more positive environment and experience, not only for yourself, but for all of those around you. Mindfulness, being mindful, practicing mindfulness can help you understand emotions. If you're distracted, for example, by what you need to do after work, or you're thinking about other stressful situations in your life, you can't pay attention to the present moment. Being mindful and aware in the moment helps you regulate your emotions and your reactions. Mindfulness can help with communication. Being mindful of what you're saying and how you're saying it helps build relationships. Have you ever had a conversation with a friend where you were distracted by another person, or maybe something popped up on your phone, you got a text message, and then all of a sudden you realize that your friend has finished what they're saying and you have no idea what they just said to you? And that's the worst, is when they ask you a question and you have no idea what they just said. And you're like, So being mindful in the moment means you're present for conversations and not distracted by other things. And, I think that distraction of technology is huge for us. I think sometimes the technology is used to help us focus and to help us not think about the stressful things, but at the same time, it's creating that experience where you're not present. Another way mindfulness helps is understanding needs and perspectives of other people. When you're mindful and you're paying attention, you will better understand the needs of others. Non-judgmental awareness is an important aspect of mindfulness. It involves accepting things as they are in the present moment, because judgment can bring feelings of guilt and shame. And if we're really recognizing and paying attention to our emotional responses to others, it can help us understand why others are behaving the way they are. So, April, do you have any thoughts on any other benefits of mindfulness before we're going to get into an experience of practicing mindfulness? But
I have been watching the chat box, and people have been sharing some really great strategies about being mindful. There's some books that were recommended on mindfulness. I see people talking about doing rituals and spell work with to help mindfulness, listening to worship music. A lot of meditation and music is coming up, Nancy. So I see that people are really thinking about how they're currently practicing mindfulness and maybe getting some strategies from their peers in the chat box. And I loved, Nancy, I'm so glad that you said that about, you're listening to a friend or a peer or somebody, and all of a sudden they're done and they ask you a question and you're like, what just happened? Because I can completely relate to that. And I have to really tell myself to be in the moment and be mindful about the conversation and listening. So I'm so glad that you brought that up.
I'm noticing in the chat kind of two streams. One are things that people do to be more mindful and to be more present. Wonderful suggestions. And the other stream are things I think that people do for their own personal fulfillment, for taking care of themselves and for stress release, walking, being in nature, reading, those kinds of things. So I'm very encouraged to see the comments that are coming through.
Yeah.
The work that we all do is stressful. I think someone in the chat mentioned about when you're working with high needs children and families, the stress of that and your care and concern for those people. And in addition to that, you have the stresses of your own life. And again, relating to COVID, am I going to get it? Oh, I have it. Oh, my child has it. Oh, and I think someone in chat said part of the stress of COVID is where's the end?
Yeah.
How long is this going to go on? So really paying attention to your own stresses as well as not taking on too much stress for the people that you're caring for. Okay, well, yes.
Oh, I was just going to say that somebody asked a really great question in the chat box that would love to hear more about what folks are doing to be mindful and decrease stress in the moment with a child, family, or coworker. So maybe we can have some peers share like in the moment strategies that you all practice out there.
And looking at the chat, it might be interesting when we go through it later, April, to almost come up with a list of all these different strategies that people do, because people are commenting that they're finding them very helpful.
Yeah. And Holly said that too, right as you were saying that, Holly.
Oh, how funny.
Said that you could create an awesome notebook from this.
There you could. This is great. Yeah. This is great. So someone just said breathing. So let's move to the next slide and actually spend a couple of moments to relax and allow ourselves to have an experience of letting go of stress and actually being in the moment. There are many different ways to practice mindfulness. Some of them involve, imagining being in a particular place or an activity. But we're going to spend a few minutes just having a little bit of an experience. So if everybody wants to just slow down, put down your fingers off the keyboard, and let's just begin by bringing your attention into your body. Get comfortable. You can close your eyes if you're comfortable doing that. We're not all together in person, so it's not as funny feeling to close your eyes. Take notice of your body seated, wherever it is you're seated, and feel the weight of your body on the chair, on the floor. Take a few deep breaths. As you take a deep breath, pay attention to bringing in more oxygen. And as you exhale, have a sense of relaxing more deeply. You can notice your feet on the floor, the sensations of your feet touching the floor. Do you feel vibration, heat? Your legs against the chair? Do you feel heavy? Do they feel light? Feel your back against the chair. Now bring your attention into your stomach area. If it's tense or tight, let it soften. Take a breath. Notice your hands. Are they tense or tight? Allow them to relax, to soften. Feel any sensation in your arms. Let your shoulders be soft. Notice your neck, throat, relax. Soften your jaw. Let your face and your facial muscles go soft. Then notice your whole body being present. Take one more deep breath. Be aware of your whole body as best you can. Let your thoughts go wherever they want. Your focus is on this moment. Take another breath. Let it out. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and come back. I want you to think about how that made you feel and how you might use something like that to reduce stress and stay present in your work environment. And how might this change you in ways that could influence those around you at work or at home? So if anybody has any thoughts on that, you can certainly put that into the chat. It's amazing the difference when someone else talks you through it, she said. Yes. Yes, I noticed that. I've read different mindfulness activities, and when it first came up that we would do this in a session, my first reaction was, oh, people have done that. It's kind of corny. They know what it's all about. But when you actually do it and you take the time and you get into it and you listen, it really does make a big difference. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about other ways that mindfulness can help. So if we move to the next slide. So kind of to summarize, mindfulness can help you regulate your emotions, can help you gain new insights and perspectives on your own situations and relationships, and gain greater understanding of the perspectives of others. Can help you have more compassion for yourself and what you might be experiencing, and to just be more aware of the present moment. And we talked earlier about how that being aware of the present moment, the benefits of that. So the next slide. These are some more ideas about things that you can very proactively do to promote your own well-being. You can, some of these we've talked about already. Living a balanced life, that can mean a lot of things. I think I start with that one because to me that almost summarizes all of the other tips that are in these on this slide. Practice health building activities. That can be exercise, eating nutritious food, drinking water. I love this next one. And again, this one has to do with the boundaries. Practice self-management by saying no. And that's often a hard one for us. We want to say yes to everyone. But it's not selfish to take care of yourself and set those boundaries. Practicing mindfulness and meditation. We've talked about a support system. Becoming proactive. Again, that one can cover a lot of things. Proactive, I would say, primarily in taking care of yourself. Taking the time to pay attention to how you're feeling and recognizing if you're experiencing compassion fatigue or burnout or secondary trauma. Save your energy for those things that are important. A few other things. I think someone mentioned this in the chat earlier, but accept help when you need it. And even if that's professional help, if it can help you be healthy and stay healthy, take advantage of what's available to you. Recognizing what is in your control and what is not, again, is really important. And thinking about setting boundaries. What kinds of boundaries are important? Yes, someone just said, set boundaries. You don't have to say yes to everything. It's really true. Professional help is a definite way to let go. There's nothing to ever be ashamed of. Thank you for those comments in the chat. Again, a reminder to stay connected to your support systems. Sleep is a good one. Do the things that make you happy. So think back to when I asked you to think about what you would do if you could do anything for a week. Find the things that make you happy and make them a priority. Often those things get set aside. Everyone else's happiness and needs become a priority. Dance when no one is looking. Someone just said, I love that. Or dance as if no one is looking. It's okay to pamper yourself. Sometimes those can be very simple things to pamper yourself. And ultimately, all of these things are to keep your pitcher full. In the chat, some people are putting suggestions for some good books to read. So this chat's going to be really interesting, April. April, do you have any other comments of things to move from fatigue to wellness?
Yeah, I think, one strategy that a colleague shared with me when I was researching this for this presentation and throughout this work is that slide, Nancy, that you shared with the what's in your control and what's out of your control. I have printed that out and I have it like in front of me all the time. So when I'm feeling like overwhelmed or like not sure what to do or stressed out, like I write down what I'm feeling, like what do I have to do? And I like little sticky notes and like stick them. Is this in my control? Is this out of my control? So that I can really visualize how I'm feeling and what's out of my control so I can kind of let it go. And so that's just been a really helpful strategy that a colleague shared with me. And I just wanted to share that with everybody too. When you get these slides, maybe print that one slide out and like put it in front of on a bulletin board or on your desk or something and help you really visualize and identify what you can control and what you can't control. And that will help relieve some of your stress and your fatigue. So I just wanted to share that little tidbit.
Yeah, that's a really important reminder. What's in your control and what's not, and then prioritizing. What can you actually get done? What's important to get done? What can wait or be put aside?
Yeah,
completely. We just can't do it all.
Yeah.
So let's look at one more slide. A few more suggestions about strengthening your skills of taking care of yourself. And again, some of these we've already mentioned, but I just want to add a few more comments to them. Your network of support, think about where you find the most support for yourself. And I read an interesting article recently where they were evaluating where people most felt they belonged, that they had a sense of belonging, and at work had a high percentage above community. I think family obviously was probably the highest, but then work, but then community. But everybody needs to figure that out for yourself. Where do you find the most support and draw on that? Use that support. And if you are experiencing something that is not supportive, then find ways to set those boundaries and build your support system. Staff wellness programs, it's really important to make sure that they include components of mental health and wellness. Often they're exercise, diet, those kinds of things. But take a look at if you have a staff wellness program, does it include support for mental health and wellness? And if not, what might you do to add that? From what you've learned today, and I'm sure of what you already knew, recognize compassion fatigue when you see it or feel it, or secondary traumatic stress, whether it's in yourself or in others. And again, if you see signs or you feel signs of either of those, talk to a professional, get help, go to your support network or talk to a professional. Don't ignore it, or just think it just goes along with the job. You just have to put up with it, because you don't. And again, your pitcher will empty very quickly and you won't be able to help anyone. And finally, think about your daily routines at work and at home, and find ways. You've already listed so many ways in the chat, but continue to think about all those ways that you can support your own self-care throughout your day, and build them into your daily routines. If meditation is important, set the time aside to do it. If taking a walk is important or going out into nature, set aside the time to do it. Make it happen, not it will happen someday. Because again, your pitcher will empty very quickly if you're not practicing self-care. So with that, I think we have another poll coming up, and then I'm going to turn it back to April.
Yes, we do have another poll, Nancy. So we're curious to know from all of you out there, how likely are you to use at least one of these strategies or practices that we just spoke about? So if we could bring that poll up, there we go. And I can just tell right off the bat from the chat box in our discussion, Nancy, that you went through, that people are already doing a lot of these things. And so I'm really encouraged and excited to see you all already starting to do some of these things and sharing with your peers and gathering ideas. So let's see, we have a few different options here. So thinking about how likely are you to use at least one of these strategies or practices. So you won't use them, probably not. You might consider them. Definitely already doing all of this, or it doesn't apply to your work. And you guys have, like I said, you guys have been so awesome about putting things in the chat box. There's going to be, like Holly and Nancy both said, there's going to be a lot to fill some documents with all of these strategies. It's so exciting. And I'm seeing some, I just saw a comment about doing some mindfulness with the children in care. And I love that idea. When I was a director of a large nonprofit childcare program, I encouraged my staff to do mindfulness breaks with their kids too. And they started doing it, and the kids just thrived and looked forward to their mindfulness moments in their classrooms with their teachers. All right. You think we're ready to close the poll, Violetta?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, thank you. Let's see what you guys decided here. Well, I think a lot, 3/4 of you decided definitely we're going to do some of this. So we don't have any won'ts. So thank you. I'm glad to see you're not that you're going to take some strategies with you and try some of these practices. So and some people are already doing some of this stuff. Like I mentioned a minute ago, you guys have been great about putting things in the chat box that you're doing. So I'm not surprised by this poll at all. Are you, Nancy?
No, not at all. Someone put in the chat that they're actually going to fill a pitcher and keep it on their desk or nearby and pay attention to what's happening during the day.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I'm a visual person. I'm not an auditory learner. And so and that's why I suggested printing out that one slide about what we can control and can't control, because it's a visual, and that, like the picture that you just example you just shared, Nancy, that's a visual for people that may need a different strategy that than auditory or tactile or anything like that.
Yes.
Think about your learning styles definitely come into play here. All right. So we are going to go to the next slide. And I think we have another, do we have another poll about where people look for support? Is that a poll that we can bring up too?
I don't think so.
No? Okay.
We do have that poll. We do have it
Okay.
ready. Would you like us to bring it up?
Yeah, if you could, we can transition with that poll. So we have another poll for you to engage in. Just kind of wondering, out of these three buckets, where do you first look for support from? And we saw a lot in the chat box, but we're just curious, like what the most of you are doing for. Oh, and it looks like family.
Not surprising.
Not surprising, yeah. I know my family is definitely where I go to first. And I have a couple of really good friends that are considered my family, and I'm able to go to them as well. So thank you for sharing all of that. All right, so we're almost through our strategy slides here. We just have a few more that we wanted to share with you. And so we just want to share some ideas about identifying resources to build resiliency for you and the children and families that you work with, and maybe you're responsible for the workforce in your organization. So just thinking about some strategies about, that you're sharing resources about trauma-informed care and secondary traumatic stress. And we have shared some resources with you here today. And then at the end of this PowerPoint, there's a lot more resources that you can pull from, and maybe you have some really great resources that you are already using. And we encourage you to put those into the chat box. If you have a website that you use or anything that you share resources from, we'd be happy to have that in the chat box for your peers. And then maybe there's a list that needs to be developed that identify the resources and the community resources that are in your area that you can put together for families or for the workforce that you're responsible for. So what is already out there that we can refer to or help support somebody get access to? And so we're curious to know, on top of the resources that you share, the websites, just any resources that you have in your state or your community that might be interesting or helpful to others that are on this webinar. We just encourage you to put that into the chat box as well. Next slide, please. So talking about social emotional health, this doesn't just, we don't just talk about social emotional health for the children in our care, but it's important for, we also have social emotional health to take care of as well. And so thinking about psychological first aid, which is actually a disaster response intervention. And the goal is to promote safety and stabilize like survivors of disasters and traumatic experiences, and connect them, the individuals that are experiencing these things, to help and resources. Psychological first aid is delivered to affected individuals, usually by mental health professionals and other first responders. And you guys are in the first responder category. You guys are on the front lines with children and families, and you get it from them more than a lot of, you get it from them, and then you share the stories, but you are actually there in the moment with the children and families experiencing these situations. And so the purpose of psychological first aid is to assess the immediate concerns and the needs of an individual in the aftermath of a traumatic experience. But it's not meant to provide therapy. It's really just, you are the first responder. So, so just something to consider there. There's also, we see a lot of you out there are mental health consultants or mental health supports for programs or organizations or children or families. And so you guys have a really big job with this topic. And so just reaching out to programs that maybe you haven't spoken with or met with, just to let them know you're available. We have the mental health consultation website right there too, if you are unfamiliar or need some support. And then we have SAMHSA as well listed here, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration's Disaster Distress Hotline. So it's nice because they have a text to talk. So if you don't want to like verbally communicate or talk to anybody, you can do a text back and forth with a professional. So just a couple of, just a few different things to think about with our social emotional health. The next slide is a really cool resource that is also in the Professional Quality of Life website. It's called a pocket card. They developed it for COVID-19, but because of COVID-19, but I really think this can be used in all kinds of different ways. And basically it's like the size of a 3x5 index card. And on one side, there is a caring for yourself in the face of difficult work. So there's 10 ideas that you could do really quick each day. And on the back of the card is a focusing on your empathy. And so how to become better at switching between work and off work modes. And so I know there was a lot of talk about empathy in the beginning of this webinar in the chat box. So this really does align with some of the conversations that have already been happening. And this is available. I'm going to put it in the chat box just to make sure. Oh, I'll put it in the chat box in a minute, but I double check the website and this is up there. So we'll make sure that you get that resource in the chat box, and it's also on the PowerPoint as well. So, all right, next slide, please. So here's some more resources from our early childhood training and technical assistance system. We have just lists of resources that can help support around emergency preparedness, this is all emergency preparedness right here, which has a lot of good information to support around traumatic stress or PTSD or compassion fatigue in general. So next slide, please. Here's some more resources. We have Practicing Self-Care and Professionalism with the State Capacity Building Center. And then the Head Start site, the Early Childhood Learning and Knowledge Center, or ECLKC, as some people know it, have a really good mental health article on promoting staff and family well-being that we listed here. And so we just have a ton, there's just a ton out there, and I'm sure you guys have resources that we don't have listed here as well. Next slide, please. And finally, we have our infant toddler resource guide. So this is a site that you can find resources to support implementation of 6 essential practices of relationship-based care framework. And it also has a host of other materials to support the development and implementation of policies and practices for high quality care for infants and toddlers. And this can be for anybody and everybody. So we encourage you to visit our infant toddler resource guide. And I see that these resources are being put in the chat box, and I appreciate you all doing that for us. So Nancy, is there anything you want to share on this wrap up of resources, or anything that I missed, or anything you're seeing in the chat box that's notable?
The only thing I would just say is, I know some of them were small and difficult to read, but we included them because we felt they were really important. And we also wanted to make sure we could do the English and the Spanish side by side. So just a reminder that you will get the PowerPoint, you will have all the slides and the resources that are listed on those slides coming to you, as well as some of the links that were in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that, Nancy. And I see somebody just asked, will the PowerPoint be sent directly to them?
Yes.
And the answer is yes. So whatever email you use to register for this webinar, that's the email that you will receive the recording and the PowerPoint to. So we have about 1 minute left, and we just, next slide, please. If there's questions or reflections, we encourage you to put them in the chat box as we're wrapping up. And as you are thinking about questions or reflections, we have one final poll question for you to answer. And so we're wondering, are there any other webinar topics that would be useful to you? So if you could enter, if you have ideas or needs, if you could put them in the chat box as well, that would help inform us of our future work. So if you could pull the poll up. Oh, no, it's not a poll. We can't do a poll. You have to enter your comments in the chat box. That's right.
Comments in chat. Yeah. Yeah.
So if there's any other webinar topics that could be useful, just put them in the chat box. And as our final slide, next slide, please. We just want to send a final thank you to all of you out there for engaging in this hour-and-a-half presentation on compassion fatigue. And we just want to send our heartfelt, good luck to all of you, and just know that we're in this together, and the work you're doing for children and families is so incredibly important outside of a pandemic, and now it's even more important. And I hope you gain some strategies to do some mindfulness and reflection in your work. So Nancy, do you have any final thoughts?
Yes, you said thank you for engaging in this webinar, and I think the key word is engaging. So we just really want to thank you for really participating. Your comments have been so informative, and from reading the chat, I can see that people are really very thankful to each other for some of the ideas that are coming through. So thank you so much for all that you contributed to this.
Mm-hmm. All right, and with that, we have come to the end of our time together. So I hope that we can see you virtually or out in the community again in the near future. That would be a best scenario, but we wish you well, and good luck in your roles, and sending really heartfelt thank you from Nancy and I. Have a great afternoon.
Take care of yourselves.